Sorry, Brendan, I'm just going to press the record button. Sorry about that.
Okay, you want to do the booking? Yeah, great.
Yeah, thanks.
So just start maybe by, number one, recording the experience itself, which happened last October, as you know. And I just want to, in a certain sense, as an act of gratitude as well, because it was a wonderful experience. And I know people, including yourselves, prayed for it and supported it and accompanied it. So I do want to kind of give that feedback from the experience. Starting with the setting, we were in the Pope Hall, the 6th hall, which is a beautiful hall. I'm sure some of you might have been in it. It's a very luminous hall. It's incredibly well lit up. And, you know, I have to say the opening ceremony, I was kind of pinching myself in a certain sense. Am I really here? Because, you know, you had all these people from all over the world, literally, you know, as I say, representing every nation and people and tribe and language in a certain sense. And, you know, you had the Pope there with us, and you had a very moving enthronement of the Word of God, which was to guide us. The opening prayer of the Pope spoke about a synod is an event where Christ is present among us. I thought that was very moving. And then it was, you know, presided over in a certain sense with this beautiful icon of Our Lady. So the setting itself, I suppose, spoke a lot to me about the space that we found ourselves in. We're a people coming together, guided by the Word, presided over by Our Lady, and yet living in this earthly reality of the church together. So that's just the first point. Of course, I went naturally with all inside me of the Irish process, which we had, and then the continental process, which I wasn't part of. Didn't go to Prague, but I had obviously the documents, read the documents, and then the worldwide documents. So they were part of what I brought to the project. And maybe this was an experience of the Synod that going forward is going to be always part of an experience. You have inside you the baggage of what you've picked up and learned and your insights, but there's always going to be this dynamic of moving into a new moment. And in this case, a new moment of 440 people, 365 of them with voting rights, laymen, lay women, and of course that was the new thing, that there were 70 lay women with voting rights. And you know, this people opening up into a new moment of the Spirit. So yes, you heard your themes that you came with, but amplified in a certain sense, amplified by the various voices from Africa, from Asia. And there were nuances that were there, which you could hear in different ways. So that your own interior connections were, I think, enriched by that. So I just want to say that. Now, as you know, the seating arrangements, I don't need to go into this in detail. They were very much so, I think, a signal of a new development. I mean, certainly bishops who had been at previous synods all said, this is very different. You know, in previous synods, you had the top table, then you had the front row. In tiers, you had tiered levels. You had the cardinals, then you had the archbishops, and you had the bishops, and then you had the religious orders, then possibly lay people if there were very, very definitely ordered in that structure. Whereas here we were round tables, 11 at each round table with a facilitator, men, women, young and old. We did have some young people too, which was wonderful. Cardinals, bishops, priests. We were asked at the beginning, how did we want to be named? And some, you know, used their first name, and some, you know, generally speaking, that was agreed. In fact, that most people went with that. So that was something very different, as I say, completely different approach. Round tables, and of course, this was only the beginning, because naturally this is something that was a symbolic moment, but it has to be then realized, I suppose, more directly in the day-to-day life of the church. It was, of course, primarily bishops, and that has to be said. Some would have preferred a greater lay presentation. Certainly some would have preferred a greater women representation at it, but undoubtedly it was a very significant first step in this new way of synodality. Some bishops, I would have to say, probably more the European, North American, were left with a bit of a question: where does episcopal collegiality fit in to all of this? Bishop collegiality, because it was one of the great breakthroughs of the Second Vatican Council, that there is a thing called episcopal collegiality. Some people had that question. Interesting, I felt Asia, South America, Africa, that didn't feature so much because they simply felt, well, look, we were part of the whole process. So that's the way our charism was exercised. And I think that's a valid point. But yeah, so this was something about synodality that was there. The relationship, as they put it, the relationship between all the people of God, the some, the College of Bishops, the one, the Pope. That maybe was an issue to be looked at and explored. Now, a great takeaway, undoubtedly, and again, I'm not going to develop this because this is something I'm sure you've heard a lot about, but undoubtedly for anybody who took part in that event, the great takeaway was the methodology of conversations in the Spirit. Literally, we spent the 4 weeks in conversations in the Spirit. It was as if the methodology was being drilled into us. Effectively, we spent about 3 days on each topic, and you were with the same table for those 3 days. And the methodology is the 4 minutes speaking, 4 minutes in the silence, and the second round, and then, giving how it resonated, as opposed to crisscrossing one another. And then finally kind of trying to discern together, where do we agree, where do we disagree, what are the questions we have. But this method of attentiveness to the Holy Spirit in our conversation certainly struck me very, very much. And it's maybe one of the points I'll probably make here later on too, that in that I was surprised, and people are saying, why were you surprised? But I was surprised by the degree of prayer during the Synod. Of course, we had opening prayers, concluding prayers. We had prayers for migrants in the Vatican itself. We had prayer rosary for the peace. We had Mass every 3 or 4 days together. Of course, we had Mass every day, but Mass together. But beyond that, throughout the actual conversations, we had prayer, 4 minutes silence after every 4 speakers. So that methodology, as I say, we spent about 3 days together, and then we moved on to another table, and then on another table, and another table. So you actually got to know a certain number of people quite well because of the intensity of the conversations which took place. Undoubtedly, that is an area where I think throughout the church, we're going to have to develop that. I mean, I can see myself in the diocese. It's something we're going to have to develop much more in our methodology, our approach to discerning, making our minds up about questions. One of the Asian delegates used a nice image, and they said this is an image that speaks a lot to them in Asia, and they had it during their Asian Synod moment, is the image of when you go into a house in Asia, seemingly you remove your footwear as a sign of respect for the space you're entering into. And that, in a certain sense, that's like an image for us too in our conversations with one another, the respect, the awareness that we're moving into another person's life, and we need to have respect for that. It was great to meet, I would have to say, as a bishop, other bishops, and this came out as perhaps a topic. The bishops ourselves, we meet, yes, in our own countries, but we don't really meet much more beyond our own countries, our own borders. So that opened up, and this would probably be true for others as well, the question about intermediary bodies. One thing is Rome, one thing is the local, but what about the intermediary? Of course, we do have the European Bishops' Conference, but really, we don't meet that much. And so there maybe is a question there about the intermediary bodies. In these conversations of the Spirit, but in general, it was something Timothy Radcliffe emphasized quite a lot, that friendship has to be at the basis of our dialogue. He said, we preach the gospel of friendships that reach across boundaries, as he put it to us in his opening retreat. And though he did admit with a touch of humor that, of course, when we would go home, if we just said to people, we made great friends, that a lot of people would say, you went all the way to Rome just to make a few friends. So that, but his point was valid, that in other words, to move from the I to the we, the way is the way of friendship, the way of listening, the way of identifying, entering into the other person's life. Of particular interest to me, again, because obviously my own commitment to ecumenism here, was the presence of fraternal dialogues from other churches. We were very blessed to have them, and they contributed fully. They were at our tables. They had the right to speak. They had the right to speak to the whole hall. They didn't vote, but they certainly contributed quite a lot to our deliberations. As we worked through it, there was an incredible amount of themes. I would say possibly in the end of the day, we probably bit off more than we really could chew. There was probably too much, but it was very interesting. So it was a little bit of a miracle that we got to the point of having a final report, a synthesis report. As you know, that was the fruit of all the conversation groups feeding in 2-page summaries at the end of every topic into a central group of theologians and experts who worked away in 5 languages, synthesizing, collating, checking out the connections, and by some miracle really provided us with a draft summary document, which then itself became the subject of our conversations in the Spirit and resulted in 1,200 amendments, which means somebody must not have slept some night, because by some miracle 2 days later we had our document revised taking into account these amendments. So that was certainly very interesting. I initially probably thought, look, gosh, a synthesis document after that 4 weeks, will it just be one of these, as I say, a committee, a group of a committee, kind of, it's a technical document. But, since I've come back and since I've read it more, I actually appreciate that the document is quite rich. It's not a document you read just from beginning to end as like a bedtime story, but there is a lot in it. And a lot of images, a lot of good points, a lot of perspectives opening up. And I think it recognizes good points where we are converging. It recognizes there are questions, the open questions. One of the questions certainly was women and diaconate. That did come up. Of course, the whole question of women and the church, that did come up quite a lot. But I did also like some of the theological, even though only 2 pages, some of the theological perspectives. And this I thought was indicative. For instance, there was the imagery of the fact that the synod is a dynamic, synodality is a dynamic that translates the Trinitarian life, as it were, where God coming to meet us with his life, into attitudes and ecclesial processes. I thought that was really good. And in the previous year, Pope Francis had said something which I like. He said, in the reality of the synodality dynamic, we can realize we can localize the point in which the Trinity converges mysteriously, but really in history. I think that's a fantastic line. And, that's opening up something for us, I think, for the church. The church really is rediscovering Trinity. Many years ago, an Italian theologian put it that there has been an exile of the Trinity in our theology, in our thought. Rahner had the same thing. Rahner said basically we're all monotheists. The Trinitarian reality hasn't really impacted on us, and we're only really beginning that now to understand it. Clearly, there have been movements in that development. You think of Pope John Paul II promoting the spirituality of communion when he had that document in 2001 at the beginning of the new millennium. There is this drive towards maybe recognizing this communion, Trinitarian interrelationship dynamic, which brings with it then co-responsibility. And what Pope Benedict said, the change of mentality that's needed. It's easy to say that. Moving on it is, of course, another day's work, but it at least opened up as a definite line of direction for the future. Undoubtedly, the topic of synodality itself remained the main topic. And I suppose if I look at the development since the Synod, the Pope has, as you know, set up various committees, study groups, partly to report back to the Synod in October, the Synodal Assembly in October, but partly also to continue a more long-term work on some of the topics that were brought to the fore at last year's gathering. So this coming gathering, it would seem to me all right, is being more focused on the issue itself, the specific issue of synodality itself. Timothy Radcliffe is speaking to us, put it this way: the global culture of our time is often polarized, aggressive, and dismissive of other people's views. When we go home, people will ask, "Did you fight for our side? Did you oppose those unenlightened other people?" But he really encouraged us to try to resist the temptation of falling into the mentality of whose side are you on? And I think that is something also the Pope himself said to us at the ecumenical vigil, which opened the Synod, which was actually a wonderful experience. It was animated by the Taizé community with a lot of young people at it. So that was really wonderful. But the Pope there too said that the Synod, really should be something that would kind of purify us of gossip and enable us to really try to hear what the Holy Spirit said. And in that sense, going back to what I said at the beginning, there was a lot of emphasis on prayer. Mother Angelini, she was a Benedictine abbess, very fine mind, and she gave inputs together with Radcliffe. Together they alternated. She really used this expression. She put it this way: today, in a culture of striving for supremacy, profit, and followers, or evasion, the patient sowing of this synod is in itself like a profoundly subversive and revolutionary act. But she immediately linked it with the seed sown, like in Mark's gospel. It's a tiny seed tiny seed planted, but it grows gradually. And I think this is what's happening with the synodality, that it's a subversive act in that sense, but a subversive in the sense that it is moving gradually, gently, but gradually into a new understanding, a way of trying to discern together what God wants. But this is something we're going to have to all learn, and that's the difficult bit. We all have to learn it. I came away, therefore, from this gathering of the Synod recognizing that Synod is not so much an event as a process. I think this is what the Spirit today is underlining. In the past, we've had events which are synods. Yes, of course, we have every now and again have events. That'll probably always be the case. But there is the synodal nature of the church itself, which is process. And with that, I think we're moving into that future. And I just hope that that process will be embedded more and more. For that to happen, we're probably all of us going to need greater engagement, training, conversion, spirituality. That was very definitely focused. Like just changing the structures alone won't be enough. We're going to need a spiritual conversion. So perhaps that's enough just for the moment to give you, I know I've just had 20 minutes, so I just want to kind of conscious of that. And other things will come out in the conversation with Denise. Yeah.
Very much indeed, Brendan. That was an excellent overview, giving us the chance to, for those of us who had a similar dialogue with Alan McGuckian, and you've developed it, and of course there's been time in between for us as part of that synodal process to be thinking and reflecting. And maybe in the spirit of the synod, we might just take a couple of minutes now to let the Spirit speak in our minds and hearts in terms of what you've shared with us. And then we'll have a dialogue, but it gives people the opportunity of, as Alan said before, what positively resonated and what prompted resistance. So both of those, I think, are important. So we'll take that time now just to be quiet together in union with the Spirit. Thank you. The first thing that comes to mind in terms of responding to what you shared so honestly and so clearly, Brendan, is in the 4 weeks where you were there at the different tables, journeying through this process with a rich variety of people, young, old, women and men, was there any, were you conscious that within yourself, there was a shift in maybe a position that you held when you arrived, and then in the light of the synodal process that maybe helped you to reflect and see it from a different perspective?
Well, yeah, yes. I mean, that is the case. The tables I was at, there were, we were divided. There were 35 topics overall, and then they were subdivided into a number of questions. So, we were allocated, let's say, I think 3 questions each. So I would have been at the table on ecumenism, the table on women and church, and then the table on governance structures, I think, collegiality. So that was, they were the 3 tables I was at. And in each case, look, yeah, it was interesting. I probably would, let's say, ecumenism, coming from Ireland, I would have a strong sense of the issues of Eucharistic hospitality and all that. Others in other continents, this wasn't as major an issue for them. And for instance, and I was trying to see things from their point of view. At the same time, there was an openness to the discussion, but I just had to. For instance, some of them were very much into the interfaith. I should say inter-church marriages and the significance of couples of different churches married together. Then the women in the church, I was in a group, certainly with very strong women, and that was great, and men, I have to say, who were very strong on the whole question of women in the church. So that was certainly good to be at that. Now, I can't say I wasn't challenged. I was challenged because there were some very strong calls, clearly, for women priests, whatever. Yes, that was there. At the same time, you had others from other continents who would say, well, no, that isn't quite our issue, but our issue is the dignity of women not being respected in our culture, and therefore also reflected in our church. Women aren't respected in the sense of just generally. And that would have applied then, for instance, in the issue of religious life, women religious life. So that became a bit of an issue. So which again is something I would have never really reflected much on. So just to hear that and to see that perspective. And you would have people giving experiences from, I have to kind of be. I'm also being slightly careful. Since I came home, I noticed I just have to be kind of slightly careful. I don't like saying too much about what went on at the tables because I suppose there is a certain element of confidentiality about those moments. But you would have had people speaking of their experiences from experience, and one, and I think it's in the public domain, would have spoken about her sister having taken her life because of the way she was treated. I think it was trans or LGBT, can't remember now, but her experience certainly was very poignant, and those things were striking. Then the collegiality one, as I say, some of the bishops were very strong on the fact that they felt the collegiality is slipping off the agenda in the church, and this was a big concern for some of them. And I probably didn't go with that issue as an issue for me, but I think the effort to try and hear them and understand them, I certainly made me reflect on that issue in a way I hadn't reflected at all on it before, really, if I'm honest. So yeah, I mean, of course, the great thing about last year was, in a certain sense, it was just us setting out our stalls. You know, there were no major decisions to be finally made. I mean, people, you know, yes, we had the whole thing about what we agree on, where we disagree, where there are questions. Yeah, that's where we got to last year. So I don't know what's going to be this coming October. Where will that go? You know.
It sounds as if it was a pretty profound experience. And as you said, it was very much in the context of a prayerful experience. And you spoke about spirit-led and discerning together. And conscious that that was just phase one, were there any areas that you think that moving into phase two in this coming October that perhaps have been prioritized and become more urgent?
Areas, well, reading the documentation that has come, I do feel that the question of synodality itself is going to be the priority. And that would mean, in other words, the implications of it, meaning the day-to-day life of the church, how we are organized, how we make decisions, who has authority, where is canon law today, what needs to change in canon law, what are the practices that need to change on the ground, what are the relationships between, you know, the faithful and the priests, the bishops and the faithful. How does all of that work in a way that is more synodal, in a realistic manner that can be backed up then by canonical provisions? I certainly think that will probably surface as a key issue, because I see it myself here sometimes. You know, with the decline, we do have of clergy, we do have a provision in our canon law, but it's something we don't really emphasize. And that is that, you know, lay people can do all kinds of roles that heretofore we just haven't considered them lay roles. But at the same time, there are limits, I think, in what canon law at the moment envisages. And I think that is something that's probably going to have to be explored more, expanded more, and needing to be worked out, because I suppose that's part of the challenge, that it's one thing to have an idea that we should all be much more co-responsible and everything else, but how does it work? And the procedures and the steps for that to happen need to be spelled out much more directly. So I think that'll be a call, I suspect, from the Synodal Assembly. The issue of women and diaconate, that did come up, and came up last year reasonably strongly, I think. I'm curious to see whether that will surface again. Certainly, on the one hand, it looks as if the Pope has put it back again into one of these commissions, but there was a calling from last year's Synod that the commissions would report to the Synod, and that there be some reporting on that. So that is going to be interesting to see whether that will come out this coming October, you know.
Yes, I struggle, like Colin gave us the statistics for your own diocese, and roughly 10% of the people are church-going. And we know that doesn't mean anything in terms of faith or spirituality, but they're not coming to the church. And clericalism emerges in that. And the other part of that is, I would say of that 10%, it'd be interesting to see how many are women. So the reality is that women were more than 50% in the church, definitely. And in the world were just over 50%. So whilst it was good that 54 women had voting rights, it's hard as a woman to realize that, again, there'll only be 54 women, roughly a seventh of the synodal grouping. So, and in terms of younger women and youth, and they see a church that's saying one thing: we're all equal through baptism, and yet we're hierarchical, clerical, and women are marginalized. So that's a burning issue that And the women deacons, the report still hasn't come out. And if women come in and there's so few priests, you know, there's so many questions there that really are urgent and a priority, I think.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, certainly they were voiced at last year's Synod, there's no doubt. And it's part of a whole movement of the Spirit. You can feel that the Spirit is doing something, and we really do have to see. I am curious to see where that will go this October. I appreciate that this October it would have been difficult for them to increase the number, in this sense that just like it was a question as to whether or not myself and Bishop Allen will be the two bishops going again, Rome's understanding was that basically last year was just part one of a two-part synod, and therefore basically the synod really should be the same group again. In other words, rather than introduce a whole load of new people, the dynamic should be the same. In other words, having had the experience last year, we continue on the dynamic. So look, we'll see.
Yes. I'm wondering too, in terms of the three themes that we're speaking about, communion, mission, and participation. We haven't heard much what that actually means, because communion then is equality. Even the report saying the church in mission, or synodality in mission, it's an interesting phrase, not on mission, and participation. How would you see that in terms of if we're trying to be gospel people who are there in a world that is so wounded, and earth that is so wounded? How do we exercise those themes?
How do we exercise, sorry?
The three themes of communion, mission, and participation.
Well, I think the intuition of Pope Francis is this, that out of Vatican II, there's no doubt communion and mission were two major themes that did come out of Vatican II. The church is a communion, and then secondly, the church's mission. Communion, of course, being again something new, because in a way, the church very much so in the second millennium increasingly became seen as institution primarily. The church is institution. You belong to the institution, you belong to the organization. It was only like really the 19th century with the German theologians, especially John Henry Newman to an extent, they began to kind of emphasize the organic dimension of the church. The church is a community, church is alive. Because remember, that's one of the key points we perhaps we forget it too easily, that Jesus is alive. And as a community, we are to be Jesus alive. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I really like that expression, that the church is Christ existing as community. And that is something that I think is at the heart of our synodality as well, that really is the conversion we've got to discover. But anyway, that was one element. And the other end was mission. Mission, as we know, took a bit of a battering after Vatican II, because on the one hand, Vatican II recognized the Spirit is at work everywhere, and that Jesus has already arrived wherever we go, so that the Spirit is constantly at work in mission. And of course, as you know, that took the steam out of a lot of the missionary orders, because, well, if Jesus is already there and the Spirit's already at work, why are we bothering? So that was a bit of a crisis in mission afterwards. Nevertheless, there is a recognition today that it is precisely mission that we have to rediscover, that the church seems to have lost its steam in terms of actually communicating this good news that Jesus is alive, and that we can actually be part of a community that has Christ existing as a community among us. And that it's not just enough to know him in your heart, but to actually be part of a community. But this is the point I want to make. I think Pope Francis's intuition was to insert the word participation, because I think he feels that's where the insights of Vatican II did not take off as much as would have been hoped. And that is because the sense of the church as a participatory body was not alive in people. Mm-hmm. So I think his focus on participation, and then in that you get the whole point about synodality, is about people themselves being church. We are church, this group here, people recognizing it, that they don't just go to church, they don't just go for the services, they don't just go for that they actually are themselves church when they go out. They come in, yes, to be nourished in the Eucharist, etc., but they go out to be church. But that is something that I think we still are. It's work in progress. It's work in progress. Yeah. But I would say maybe this would be an observation that this is something that we could have developed more, I think. Now it's there in the final report. I don't want to say it's not there, but I'm not sure it's as strongly there as I would have liked looking back. And that is the church's mission in the world. There are so many issues today facing us, social issues, the cries of humanity. We know the environment, we know the social issues, peace, justice, all these issues. In a strange sense, I think sometimes we've gone slightly backwards. We are kind of very much now focusing just on ourselves. But the fact of mission, that we're a primarily lay, I would say, missionary church, I think we've lost the consciousness of that somehow, or at least put it this way, it hasn't developed as much as maybe we could have hoped after the Second Vatican Council. I think, for instance, very often the world, in the past, I sometimes think, now it's before my generation even, that they used to have, for instance, retreats. The Jesuits would do retreats for doctors, retreats for lawyers, retreats for... Then we went away from a lot of that. But I often wonder, those worlds today, how does mission impact in those worlds? The world of lawyers, the world of educators, the world of artists, worlds of scientists. Somehow they're floating out there and we're not impacting them. Pope Paul VI's famous thing, the big split between culture and faith. So I think the participation element that Pope Francis wants to highlight has to do with our commitment in those worlds. And that's at least, so in that sense, I think there's an issue I would love, if I had time, to develop theologically, and that is what I would call the lay profile of the church. I do think, as you say there, Denise, clericalism, the Pope is forever on about clericalism, as we know, and sometimes to a degree that perhaps annoys some people, but he has an intuition, I think, which is the church is primarily, really, this is my language anyway, church is primarily, should have primarily a lay profile.
Which dovetails into that, and Pope Francis is trying, but that we as women and the female part of our church want to be part of the decision making, want to be round the table. And it's just sort of like a chink of a door is open. And you're not going to really get full lay participation till that door is opened wide. I think of my nieces and grandnieces, and they say, where is there a place for us? It's very hard. And yet,
yes,
good news of the gospel, it's really exciting. The current series of The Chosen is bringing in thousands of people because they're discovering the humanity of this person, Jesus, the way they've done the film. Say, we didn't know this. So until I think we bring more women in on an equal basis, and the clericalism has to be eliminated, we're not going to move forward into that, the fullness of sharing the gospel on a much wider, broader canvas, if you like.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly the issue, the whole question of women jurisdiction, decision making, that came up very definitely last year. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And maybe just a final comment there that I wonder, Brendan, how you respond to, I've met, and I'm sure you've met too, some women who genuinely have a call to priesthood. Your own priesthood obviously means so much to you, and it's enriched your life, and that's been your journey and mission. Imagine if that had been denied to you, that you couldn't follow that vocation, as you honestly believed the Spirit was calling you. So are you aware of the pain and the bewilderment and of those who genuinely, courageously have shared that they have that call?
Sure. Look, I mean, I know only too well there are women who have discern that. I know we have Celine here with us tonight. Absolutely, this is a topic we has been mentioned before. Yeah, I go along a certain way with it. At the same time, I have to recognize that you know, the question of the vocation to priesthood. Yeah. Well, I suppose I think a lot of things about this. I wouldn't emphasize, surprisingly enough, now I may be shocked when I say this, I rarely say my priesthood. You will not find that on my lips. My vocation was simply to follow Jesus. At that time, you could say, well, look, I was a 20-year-old at that time. That was a particular way that opened up for me. But I have always seen it as I was just following Jesus. So,
but in a very clear-cut, affirmative way, and in the community, in the church, very, very differently from many of the rest of us who are trying to respond to exactly the same invitation.
Correct, yeah. That's the point, that it's a fundamental vocation, which is to follow Jesus. That's the fundamental vocation. At the end of the day, yeah, even the priesthood will pass. I won't be a priest in the next life. That'll be gone. The vocation is to follow Jesus. That's, and I genuinely believe that. It's my baptism is the fundamental vocation. After that, if the church needs me to do this or that, it does. Then it asks me to do it. That's fine. But I go back. I appreciate that there are people who differ on that. People say, no, I have a deeply held sense of a vocation. Yeah, fair enough. You know, so I accept that.
Brendan, thank you so much. You've been very honest and have taken the questions full on. It's time now, and I've really enjoyed our dialogue. It's time now to open it to all our participants who are here. And so I'll hand over